topic that we study quite extensively in organizational behavior, but also one that we see debated quite a bit in mainstream pop culture, if you will. This whole concept or this whole construct of leadership, what is it to us? What does it mean? What does it entail? So many people have different perspectives on it. So many people have thoughts and opinions on what it takes to be an effective leader or not. So we're going to be debating that quite a bit today. We're going to be understanding the science behind it, if you will, getting a better understanding of what truly leadership entails, what are the different facets of it, what are the different perspectives that we could take on it. To get us started, because it's such a topic that could garner a lot of opinions or various perspectives that could be very personally informed, usually one thing that I like to start with is, what are your thoughts on what is leadership to you? What do you make of the construct of leadership, or what is the definition of leadership to you?
Providing direction.
Okay, other stuff? Really, a topic as big as leadership, everybody's concerned with it all over the world, and we have no opinions on it. There you go.
I think there's a very strict difference between leadership and management.
Okay, so what is management versus leadership?
I feel like management is supposed to provide you with the amount, the proper resources in order for you to complete a task, whereas leadership is more directed towards how well you motivate others.
Okay, more relational kind of. Sure. It emphasizes the relational components. Okay, other stuff, other thoughts on leadership and what it is. Noah again?
I think it takes someone who has a stronger personality, who's less easily manipulated.
Okay, so you're arguing that there's kind of the personality or trait facet to it. So it's not just kind of like you guys started off by pinpointing kind of behaviors, but now you're bringing in that personality facet to it, and that's true. Like, you can't just kind of take one perspective. It is very versatile. If we were to kind of point a type of personality or personality traits that we think are conducive to good leadership, so what makes somebody arise as a leader, and you could even argue kind of like, what are the traits that generate an effective leader? Not only a leader, but an effective leader. Any thoughts on that?
Definitely be a people person.
Okay, so from the personality traits that we've already learned this semester, if you were to get that question on an exam and you were to really pinpoint a personality trait that we learned, which one might you say? Okay, so we're going to want to remember those for the exam. Okay, so big 5 personality traits, we want to refresh our memories of those. Lavina?
We could probably touch on conscientiousness.
Okay.
We're kind of being able to plan whatever we're trying to implement.
Okay. Okay. Other personality traits that might be relevant? Would you say, though, like to Diego's point earlier, conscientiousness might be better affiliated with kind of like management, kind of like you're laying out a process?
Definitely, but with that said, I think that feature really needs to be in a position where if you're leading, because in order to lead, you'd be assigning things to other people, and we kind of touched on it. When assigning something, in order for it to be done properly, you need to know what you're assigning it to whom. So you kind of really need to be able to plan on things.
Okay. Okay, so it is an aspect of leadership, kind of that managerial
Maybe
or
not
that
leadership,
process. Okay, good points. Other stuff, other personality traits that might be of relevance?
Having a high emotional intelligence.
Okay, yeah, no, that's absolutely good, right? And a big misconception throughout our study of leadership is that we kind of always need leaders who are like out there and extroverted and always like boisterous and loud and always voicing their opinions. But we are getting more findings kind of surrounding the benefits of having leaders who are able to kind of take a step back, process emotions, process information, and then get back to it. So yeah, high emotional intelligence is something good when you're leading teams. What will come here and then we'll move on.
You already said it, but extroversion.
Yeah. Yeah, extroversion is that one trait that we generally see, and because our studies, I'd say that we do have a bit of a bias in that we focus quite a bit on, so that's why we do see a lot of correlations between extroversion and leadership. So it's good to be extroverted, but we are starting to find evidence surrounding the benefits of introversion. Okay?
Someone who's good at pinpointing people's strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Absolutely. Right. And now you're starting to kind of like gear us towards talking about the situation, and not somebody who has a good reading of the situation, somebody who understands who the people that he or she is interacting with, what they are all about, and how they could kind of go about maximizing their outcomes. That is critical. Absolutely. Sorry, Heather.
was already said, but
Okay.
most of it. But also, I feel like a leader should be trusted with the knowledge of what they're leading you towards, kind of.
Okay.
Too.
So kind of like adding in the trust and the ethics component. Is that what you're arguing for? Kind of the ethicality component. Okay. Yeah. Other thoughts on leadership? No.
Sorry, that is maybe like responsibility.
Okay. So accountability for your outcomes and your procedures or processes that you implement. Okay. Other thoughts before we keep going? Yeah.
Definitely, like open-mindedness.
Okay.
Especially when
Tell me
it comes
more.
to, like new ideas and like self-talk.
Okay.
So obviously we have to like take in ideas from our different group. As a leader, you kind of choose which like path is to.
Yeah, absolutely right. So having that openness to bringing in different perspectives and assimilating different perspectives. You might argue, for example, if you're looking for theory to support such an answer in the exam, you might tie it to openness to experience, so the personality trait that is required by it. And yeah.
And then I think the last aspect that might be helpful is to be openness to experience, where I think being a leader without a lot of experience can go well, but I think it is definitely helpful to have a lot of experience in whatever you're trying to lead. So maybe
Okay.
knowing different aspects of different things.
Okay. Okay. That versatility and from kind of the abilities perspective. Okay. Any other thoughts before I keep going?
So,
Yeah.
can we say that in general, it is like attitude plus knowledge in leadership? To like leadership depend on attitude and knowledge, but management could be the knowledge is enough by itself.
Attitude. Tell me more about what you mean by attitude.
Like I mean, the
Give me an
leaders.
example.
Yeah, for example, the good leader is the one that can prepare for the next step, like
Oh, okay. I think you mean by like maybe vision, like having
how
vision, having
influence the
foresight.
people. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and those are aspects of it, kind of like getting that ability to persuade, that ability to motivate
Exactly,
somebody
yeah.
and kind of compel somebody to follow your vision. And we're going to be touching on that in one of the styles of leadership. That is kind of a pivotal aspect. And we'll talk about kind of like where it stands in that. Is it an attitude? It's probably more so along the lines of kind of behaviors, things that the leader does. And you'll see how that is kind of like what the spin is on it. But yeah, it is definitely there in the transformation of leadership, and we'll get to that shortly. Okay. So, leadership, if we're looking for kind of a good definition to coin what it entails or what it really, serves in the organization or within groups of people, one definition that I found to be really helpful and really versatile and something that you could apply across the board at a personal level, like for the leader, him or herself, but also in how they relate or affiliate with others, so when they're leading a team perhaps. So one definition that I really like and I found it to be quite helpful is leadership is that ability to generate forward movement. Okay? And it could be that you're looking to generate forward movement in yourself, right? So as a leader, I am working on myself. I am working on my personal growth so that I could be a better leader of others, right? So you're generating that forward movement in yourself. But it can also be that you're looking to generate forward movement in others, right? It doesn't have to be kind of just within the person, but it could be in how that leader is affiliating with others. So how do I help my employee maximize his or her outcomes? How do I help my employee accomplish his or her tasks on time? How do I make them feel that they are valued in the organization so that I could boost their job satisfaction as an outcome, as an attitude? Okay? How do I boost their organizational commitment through the actions that I do as a leader, right? So that's kind of how you're generating that forward movement, right? Another take on it is that, as a leader, you're doing lots of activities that fall along the lines of influencing and motivating and guiding others, right? Again, we're seeing that relational component. I would say that relational component is imperative. It is something critical. You're not just leading yourself, or you're not just leading a concrete organization. You're leading others who are driving that effort, right? So you're doing a lot of influencing, you're doing a lot of motivating, you're doing a lot of enabling and guiding, right? And what you're doing, like to all of that, is you're trying to gear the employees in the right direction. You're trying to get the employees towards effectiveness and towards good outcomes for themselves and for the organization through doing those things yourself. Okay? So it is important to understand kind of that it is not just something that you do kind of at people, but it is more a back and forth. It's a mutual, it's a reciprocal effort. And it's kind of there's no selfishness in it necessarily, or ideally we don't want to see selfishness in it. We want to see that you're helping others get to that place. You're helping others get towards those outcomes that they personally value, but also the organization values. Yeah.
I remember we touched upon self-transcendence
Okay.
before. Would that be kind of like related to that?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
also have to care, especially with other people.
Yeah.
And as a leader, you have to like motivate them as well.
How do you go beyond yourself, right? And we're going to see kind of the different styles of leadership, and ones that kind of maybe emphasize self-transcendence or require quite a bit of self-transcendence, and others that really don't as much, right? So yeah, very astute point there. Now, generally when we talk about leadership, or historically when we've talked about leadership, we do tend to kind of focus on leadership as a position, or kind of leadership when it's given as a formal role to one person who is taking the helm, one person who is taking the lead of a certain team or an organization. But we do have this new concept that's more emergent and newer, and it is the idea of shared leadership. And you may be hearing of companies nowadays that are kind of not as hierarchical anymore, and they work in kind of like tribes in the organization, or they have different pods. We call that, in practical terms, we call that the phenomenon of holacracy. And essentially it's kind of like they identify what are the strategic objectives of the organization. So what are the major projects that the organization wants to really work on and get out the door ASAP, okay? And then they ask people to kind of just come together, bring in their skills, what they know how to do best, and kind of like volunteer for those projects, for those strategic projects. So you're no longer just kind of like somebody who's hired as a marketing analyst, and then you're just sitting at your desk within the marketing department waiting for potentially having a small say in all the projects of the organization. But it's more so, I identify what are my interests and how I could help my organization and my team best, and then I join that kind of strategic initiative, and I contribute work, effort, and leadership to it. And what happens in those structures, in those pods, or in those teams, is you don't just have kind of like one person who's designated as the formal leader, and they're just kind of like monitoring the process throughout. No, it's a bunch of subject matter experts, people who know their field, and who know how to actually bring in their marketing knowledge to this problem, and who know how to bring in their HR knowledge to this problem. And then at different times, as the project is progressing or unfolding, they take the leadership role. Okay? So it's kind of like they're all contributing into the leadership of that team or that pod. They're all kind of adding their 2 cents into it. So I step up. I say, right now the project needs me to kind of be taking a bit of the lead. I will be telling you guys, I will be guiding you in this. I will be motivating you to get through this stage. But after that, after let's say we finish our product, now it's time to kind of focus on sales and marketing. That's when I take a bit of a step back, and then I become reciprocal. I become receptive to receiving influence and leadership from others in the team. So that's when I let somebody else who's the subject matter expert in sales and marketing step up and take a bit of the lead and start motivating the team, or start influencing the team there. Okay? So those are the key things that we see in shared leadership. Now, most people oftentimes kind of automatically kind of think of it as a catastrophe. It could be like quite a messy process in that, you know, we don't have one formal leader. Everybody's trying to pitch in. Everybody's stepping up to the plate. There's a lot of back and forth. How does anything ever get done? And the thing is, what we found is the types, it's not for every organization, and it's not for every project, right? Some organizations still require a certain level of hierarchy. But some organizations, especially like in the IT sector, it requires, like, shared leadership is oftentimes seen the most in IT projects or in the IT sector. And it's because those types of projects generally benefit from that type of approach or that type of structure. So we do want to keep that in mind, and that it's not absolutely for every organization. It works in some organizations better than others. Another thing that is critical for shared leadership to work is that the team, or everybody on the team, feels a sense of responsibility and accountability. So yes, we're giving you a lot of autonomy to dictate how the process goes. Yes, we're not, restricting you to one department or one desk, and we're just handing you work to do and we dictate the whole process. You're getting all that leeway and all that authority and all that freedom, but in exchange, you better deliver high-level results. So we're not skimping on what we're expecting from you. We expect quite a high caliber of outcomes from you. Okay? So that's a key thing to note here. in regards to shared leadership is that it doesn't have to be as messy as we think it is or as we might perceive it. It could be. There are some things, there are some boundaries that we put in place, and it could be actually quite beneficial for companies or organizations, especially ones that are agile. They're always kind of like needing to produce on a fast cycle. It could be quite beneficial for them. Okay, some key things that we need in terms of boundaries. The formal leader of that organization is going to have to be willing to defer some of that autonomy. He or she is going to have to kind of be comfortable with letting others take the helm a bit and share it. Okay, you're going to want to make sure that there's a collaborative culture that understands that and that is receptive to that. If you have a very individualistic culture in the organization where everybody wants to work on their own initiative and not actually share the responsibility, it's probably not going to be conducive to shared leadership actually being effective. And another thing that we also want to make sure is in place is that your team is quite able to take on such a challenge in that they are truly subject matter experts. Okay, we're not taking in kind of like entry-level people who just joined the organization and we're saying, take a lead on this marketing project. It has to be people who truly understand the full process and who are subject matter experts in their domains. Okay, so that they could actually generate influence and motivate others to follow them during certain stages of the project. Okay, so those are some key things to note about shared leadership and how it differs from your traditional single-person leadership. Okay, Diego, is it your hand? Is up?
Yeah, you hit.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions about shared leadership or regular traditional leadership? Okay. Now, by the way, I don't know what's going on with the projector today, but the title of the slides is getting cut off. So we have multiple styles of leadership or different approaches to how people lead in organizations or lead groups. The first one, and one that is like the most out there and the one that you'll hear a lot about and it gets a lot of attention, is transformational leadership. And transformational leadership is that type of leadership that is truly high level. It's very much so focused on creating a new vision and generating outcomes beyond the imaginary. So it might be beneficial when an organization is going through a time of change, or like they're releasing kind of a whole new product that is going to be groundbreaking, right? So you're looking for someone who is able to kind of articulate that vision for employees and is going to get employees convinced to actually help in that process of creating something new or challenging the norm or challenging the status quo. So usually transformational leadership is really associated with grand outcomes, something extraordinary, something beyond belief, something beyond the status quo. Okay? So we're going through a demographic change and I need somebody in this organization to actually get people to think differently and to innovate and to create more, right? So you need somebody who knows more than just kind of laying out the process on a day-to-day basis. You need somebody who is able to handle that groundbreaking nature of the work that you're doing. Okay? So that's where we generally see transformational leadership. You're trying to gear your employees to deliver outcomes or performance beyond what you're used to, beyond expectations. It's a whole new thing. It's a whole new approach. And we need somebody who's so effective and so transformational that they are able to deliver on that. Okay? Now, some key aspects that enable transformational leadership to be effective or for it to take place, if you will. Okay? There are 4 key processes or 4 key behaviors that we notice or that have been found to be effective and to then enable us to say that transformational leadership has taken place. Okay? And the first one is you're going to want to actually develop and communicate a vision. So again, transformational leadership is all about kind of something new, something groundbreaking, something that we're not used to, something that we haven't done in the past. It's something that we're trying to create right now, something innovative, something creative. So the leader must be able or must have that ability to show us those behaviors of developing and communicating a vision to others, right? So you have to show them what it is that you're looking to get towards, okay? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? What is our new mission? What is our new vision? What are we working towards? Is the leader able to kind of develop that to start with and then communicate it in a way that others understand, right? So that is an initial step that is critical. The leader must be able to do that, must be able to articulate a vision and communicate it, okay? Now, this is something that we've talked about quite a bit, and we've talked about it in the realm of ethics perhaps quite a bit, is modeling, right? And we talk quite a bit when it comes to leadership, we talk quite a bit about the things that they role model, or the things that they model for employees. So again, as the leader, you are somebody who everybody is looking up to in the organization. Everybody is looking for cues and direction from you on how to act and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So if you are articulating a new vision and you are trying to convince your employees to start doing things a certain way, right? Let's say we're trying to be more innovative, right? So the leader starts with step one, they develop and communicate a vision that is focused on innovation and creativity and creating new things for the organization. Okay, so let's say this is our case. Okay, now the second thing that the leader needs to do is to make sure that in everyday interactions and everyday work that they are doing themselves, they are modeling that. They are showing that they themselves are innovative in the way they go about doing work. Okay, so that role modeling or that modeling aspect is quite pivotal. To your points earlier surrounding kind of trust, in that, again, if my leader only does step one, but does not actually walk the walk, walk the talk, if my leader actually does not kind of like follow through on that and shows me how they are actually implementing it or enacting that vision on a day-to-day basis, then I lose trust in them, and then I may not take it seriously myself. And that, oh, this was just a speech that leader was giving, but I don't see it actually being manifested on a day-to-day basis. It's not enacted in the processes that we have in the organization on a day-to-day basis. So that's where you lose kind of the level of seriousness or level of serious interest in the project or in the endeavor itself, right? So those are the things that it's signaling to you when the leader doesn't or does model that vision. Okay? Questions about those first two steps or behaviors, critical behaviors to generate transformational leadership? No.
I have a question in general. Do companies usually hire someone to come in and do this, or they take someone from here?
Like to develop a vision, a new vision?
Like, is there people who come into the company for like change management or something?
Oh, there are. Yeah, no, there are. But so you might see two approaches to this. You might see kind of a leader who joins the organization, or a leader who's already in the organization, and they're like, okay, we need to like change things up a bit. So the leader might set that from the top. I mean, they might still engage kind of like consultants, and they might still engage mediators to kind of get the group together and try to figure out what that vision is. But ultimately, you are looking for that initial step from the leader. The leader has to kind of like coin that vision and articulate it and move the process forward, right? Other times, though, yeah, to be fair, kind of like you do see organizations just hiring consulting companies and saying, figure out what's wrong in our company, right? And not they may kind of articulate the vision, or they may kind of advise the company on what they need to be working towards. So you might see that. Is it effective? Generally, any consulting work or any consultants that you bring into a company, it's very rare that actually their initiatives work out. It tends to be a whole process of them selling contracts, and they get millions of dollars off of it. So it's a money-making business. And they often tell you just what you want to hear. So that's why it's quite questionable in how effective it is. So ultimately, kind of when we think of this is, yeah, we're thinking of like you hire a leader, a CEO, or the current CEO is somebody who is championing something new. It doesn't have to be CEO. It could be like somebody who's leading a team, right? So our team needs to be more innovative, right? So yeah, ideally, you're looking for it to be generated or provoked from whoever the person is that's at the helm. Now, moving forward, the other steps or the other key behaviors that enable transformational leadership to take place or facilitate its existence or its effectiveness, the leader must also now start encouraging questioning or dabbling with this new idea or with a new way of doing things, right? So the leader started modeling the new things. They started modeling how we should become innovative as an organization. They showed us how we should do it on a day-to-day basis across all of our processes. But now it's time to help your employees kind of get engaged with it. You want your employees to start dabbling with it themselves, and you want them to question it, especially if it's a new process or if it's a new thing, it's a new innovative solution that we're trying to propose and trying to administer across the board in our organization, right? You don't want to be a dictator in a sense and just kind of like force everybody to opt for this approach that you thought was great. You want to get your employees to actually kind of pinpoint the weaknesses in that new approach or that new vision that you're championing. Okay? So that's why we want to encourage experimentation. And I don't want to kind of be the type of leader who just says, okay, this is what I like, and this is what I'm doing right now, and you guys should do it the same way I am doing it, right? This is not the motive of step 3. The motive of step 3 is, I want you to try it, but I want you to kind of challenge it. I want you to tell me where the weaknesses of it are. I want you to ask questions about, why are we doing things in this way versus that other way, okay? So that is something that you're doing here as a leader. That is a key activity here. You're challenging your employees. You're trying to intellectually stimulate them, okay? So again, we're trying to bring them into the process. Yes, I am the one who created the vision, but I do want you to be the part of the process of kind of refining it or making it the best new innovative process it could be, okay? So those are some key things that we're noticing. And lastly, the final thing that you're going to be doing to generate transformational leadership or to exhibit transformational leadership, effective transformation leadership, is you're going to get your employees to actually commit to it. Okay? Once we see that the employee or the organization as a whole started committing to it and started doing things across the board in an innovative manner, okay, that's when you could say that you've been transformational or you've actually been effective as a transformation leader. Okay? So those are some key things to note there, Shannon.
Could you still say that it's effective even if the employees that are following it don't necessarily agree with it?
That's where we start bringing in kind of like that personal aspect of what you think effective leadership is versus what somebody next to you might think effective leadership is, right? So somebody might say, well, he or she got them to do it, so like that is, like, he got the task done, and period, right? So somebody might be of the perspective that that is effective leadership. Whereas you might say, well, but he or she did not get buy-in for it. Everybody seems to be following that leader blindly, and they're not actually questioning it. So you might be of the perspective that that leader is not transformational, whereas that leader might be, and we're going to be covering that in a bit. I thought it was the next slide. But it might be kind of like what we call managerial or transactional leadership. Okay? So that's where kind of like that bias or that perspective, that personal perspective on leadership would come in. Okay? It's up to you to decide. Nobody can kind of like necessarily say you're wrong or right. Okay? So, moving away from transformational leadership, one that kind of comes close to it, or one that is similar on the surface, a similar style of leadership on the surface, is charismatic leadership. And remember, transformational leadership, like the reason why we think it's kind of similar to charismatic, or why you might perceive them as being potentially similar, transformational leadership is about like kind of big things happening. It's about communicating a new vision. It's about creating new things. It's about challenging the status quo. It's about performance beyond expectations. It's at this higher level of doing things, right? We're not used to this, okay? And if we think about charismatic leadership, the key aspect being charisma, right? So that is somebody who has that innate ability within them, that magnetism. They have that charm in that whatever they say, people just want to drift towards them, and they want to follow them, and they want to do what they're doing as well. Okay? So that's why kind of charismatic leadership is kind of grand in itself as well. It has that kind of like big aspect that is similar to transformational leadership. The difference though between, and it's a key distinction, and it could be quite detrimental if we kind of mistake the two. The key distinction between transformational and charismatic leadership is that charismatic leadership is kind of grander and pomp and just that. It is all about kind of like being loud, and it is about kind of like attracting others to kind of support you, but you're not necessarily interested in going through those behaviors that help us get somewhere. Okay? You're just about kind of speaking about a vision, perhaps, or kind of talking about a certain ideal state of affairs. But you're not really somebody who is truly laying out how we're going to go about achieving this vision, or you're not modeling this vision necessarily. You might not be doing that. Whereas in transformational leadership, we actually see those behaviors, and we see those different processes take place. Okay? Charismatic leadership, the critical aspect of it, or the critical component of it, is charisma, right? It is something that generates power for yourself because everybody likes you, everybody is drawn towards you, everybody just drifts towards what you're talking about, and they are just kind of motivated or charmed to follow what you say. Okay? okay? But there aren't kind of like steps and processes or procedures or behaviors that are involved in charismatic leadership. And there are some concerns surrounding charismatic leadership, okay? Because again, what you're seeing here is that people might be following blindly, okay? And also kind of, you know, as a charismatic leader, you're not necessarily concerned with what the followers are going to get or what outcomes they're going to report. What you're concerned with is kind of just articulating a vision that appeals to you as a leader, and period. Okay? And that's where we kind of get into the debate of like, well, what if what you're interested in is something that is quite negative, right? So oftentimes in higher levels, in leadership classes, like at the 4th year level, when we ask students to kind of like pick a leader and kind of talk about their style and all of that, like, yeah, sometimes you do get papers from students arguing that, well, you could argue that Hitler was a leader, was a charismatic leader. And yeah, if we are going by those definitions, yeah, Hitler is probably a charismatic leader because he rallied a bunch of people after him. Now, where the question comes in is, what was that vision that you were trying to kind of push? And it was quite a negative vision, right? Or it was something negative. So he was rallying people towards something negative. It was something destructive, right? And we still see that, right? So we see similar patterns. And that's why charismatic leadership, we need to make sure that we're not confusing it with transformational. Because transformational, you're concerned with others still. You're concerned with helping others achieve something good. Okay? Charismatic, on the other hand, the question is kind of out there in that you're somebody who has charm and magnetism, but what you're luring people into, or what people are following you on the basis of, could be something negative. Objectively, it could be something negative, but you were so charming that you got them to follow you, right? So that's the key distinction there. Diego and then
I feel like charismatic leader is like an individual that has, in order for them to continue being a leader, like they have to be in constant change. Because like I would imagine that like at one point that charisma kind of just diffuses and you just get used to that person saying that specific thing, whatever, right? Like, and like for example, like if you use the example of Hitler, or whatever, right? He started by just like doing small jabs, and he eventually started like really attacking specific communities, or whatever, right? And, like, so I feel like you have to like really evolve as a charismatic leader, right?
So you're saying kind of like you have to kind of always change your messaging maybe, or make sure that your messaging is always kind of going to rally
Like
the troops in a
for
sense?
example, like the transformative leader like says what they're going to do, and then like actually performs that.
You stick to a vision and you're consistent.
Yeah. Whereas charismatic is more fluid.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It could be, right? A situation could call for you to kind of be very sneaky, and like you're always messaging to appeal to your base, in a sense, right? I think that's what you're saying is that you might have to be a bit of a chameleon, and it could be part of charisma, and that you are a chameleon who knows how to always be messaging to the base and always appealing to your base, so that they never kind of like are demagnetized towards you, right? I would say what is consistent in those types of leaders is that innate charm and that magnetism that they have that just enables them to draw the crowd towards them. I'd say that is what's consistent. But yeah, your messaging could change as you move forward in order to make sure that you're always appealing to them and always keeping them behind you, right? The other thing I will say though is people who are, or followers who are in this kind of like trance, they are very good at rationalizing things. So even though your messaging might still be objectively, like you might go to them and be like, but the leader that you followed under this message, he's now saying something completely different, and how are you still kind of drawn to him? And they will eloquently come up with all sorts of rationales and justify, like they will, as human beings, we are good at that. So there's a book that I read with my diversity class, and it says basically like, when we say somebody is intelligent, or human beings like become intelligent or have like a higher IQ or become more educated, really what we become better at or smarter at is how well we develop rationalizations and justifications for everything that we're observing. And that is what you see there, is that regardless of the message, even though the leader might be trying to kind of like, message in ways that are versatile and that will always appeal to them, but they are also so drawn and so magnetized that they will come up with all sorts of rationalizations and justifications to make sure that, again, they're not at threat. Their ego is not being crushed down, and they're always right. So different things could be going on here. No.
Can a charismatic leader produce dependent followers based on fear, or is it just based on charisma?
I would say, so we do have other kind of like styles of leadership, like toxic leadership and kind of like coercive power. So I would say this one, it's actually more so like, no, the people are voluntarily kind of drawn and voluntarily want to follow that leader. Would there be some fear-mongering, perhaps, as part of that leader's strategies? Yeah, potentially. But I wouldn't say it's kind of like fear in terms of like coercive power over them, or like if you don't follow me. No, that's a dictatorship, right? So we have other styles that kind of touch on that. This is kind of more so focused on like, no, I willingly want to follow you, and I'm drawn to you, and I'm just magnetized by you and everything you say.
By their personality or by their ideas?
Generally, so because here there's charismatic leadership, it's more so kind of just who that person is, and it's that charm. And it is a big question. Like there are some books out there on like charisma is not necessarily innate, or it's not something within you, but you could actually work on it, and you could actually kind of perfect it, and you could actually do certain behaviors or do certain things that make you charismatic. And then you have another school of thought that is more along the lines of like, no, charisma is just like, you either have it or you don't. And I don't know. It's one of those gray areas. Kind of like, yeah, if some people say that, yeah, you do have charisma as an innate ability, and others perceive it as you could actually kind of do certain things to make you more charismatic. Kind of like an obvious example, if you follow U.S. politics, like Hillary Clinton, the biggest kind of like criticism in the most recent campaign surrounding her was like, you're trying too hard, or like you're trying to be so appealing to the base, and you're trying to be so appealing to millennials. Like that was a criticism kind of surrounding her, and like you tried too hard to be charismatic. Like when they asked her, they were like, Hillary, what's in your purse? And she was like, I carry hot sauce in my bed. Did you hear? No. Did you not follow? It's like come on, like that was obviously such a flop, and you're not like charismatic at all in doing that. Or like,
would you consider like Trump charismatic?
oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Quintessential example of charismatic leadership.
Yeah, rather than ideas.
Yeah, because there's all fluff. There is no policy. There is no actual tangible platform. Or even the hypothetical platform that is out there, you have not laid out the steps towards getting there, right? So in the most recent shutdown debate over the wall, that's where that became apparent, and that the fluff became apparent, and that's where he was concerned with his image, right? But was his base altered? Probably not, because they are so charmed and magnetized by him. So that's what tells you the charismatic side is there.
Interviews all the time, and they don't actually know what is going to do.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I follow them.
Yeah. And that's kind of like a key weakness in charismatic leadership. Is like you could be all fluff potentially and no substance to you. Like some people might argue Justin Trudeau is charismatic. I would say so. I would say kind of like that's why the party pushed him towards a leadership position, or gave him or tried to get him in a leadership role. I wouldn't say that he's probably all fluff, or to the extent, of Donald Trump, for example. But I would say he's probably more on the charismatic rather than necessarily transformational side. Yeah, I don't know. Thoughts? Not on anything in general. Okay. So yeah, key things about charisma.
In terms of like leaders and stuff of like countries and stuff, how do you make sure that? Well, you can't make sure, but would you say that a transformational leader would be the best to run a country, or a charismatic one, or other?
It depends.
Okay.
I would take, if you want, take the municipal election for Toronto, the most recent one, where it came down to John Tory versus Jennifer was her first name? Keesmaat. And like she was obviously someone who was like new, visionary, proposing new ideas. A lot of them were kind of like debatable as to how realistic they are or how achievable they were. But she was someone younger. She was someone who was like, could have been a good kind of force for Toronto, as Toronto like is becoming more of a cosmopolitan and worldly city. So you could make that argument. But also the way a lot of people saw it is that, well, Toronto's been doing fine though, like over the past few years, and we've been kind of like not, worrying about anything going badly. So why not just kind of like keep John Tory for another term? So kind of, it does depend on the situation and people's reading on it. So, John Tory, for example, probably not somebody who was doing any transformational leadership, I would say, over the past few years. In his current second term, I don't think there's anything transformational necessarily. He is a transactional leader or managerial leader, which is what we're going to be talking about now. But I see the argument that people made in that, like, we're fine. Like, Toronto is doing fine, and why should we kind of dabble with somebody new? Like, even though she's great, and she's a great candidate in general, but does Toronto even need this transformation? And could it be detrimental in the end? So I don't know. It depends on the country or on the situation or on the organization and what it's working towards and how much buffer zone it has. Lots of things come into play. Okay? Now, moving kind of as we start wrapping up the topic of transformational leadership to talk about other styles, some things that concern us when it comes to transformational leadership. So even though it is good at generating those big outcomes like job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and it gets people to do OCBs in the organization, but we do worry about it quite a bit. Generally, transformational leadership, oftentimes the way we judge those leaders or what we're looking for is them really kind of generating that success, but we don't always assess them. If we're opting for that transformational leadership model, we don't kind of look at the different things they do on a day-to-day basis. We always look at the very end, the final outcome, as to kind of like, did they enact that change? Did they actually generate commitment to it or not, right? So somebody might still be able to generate commitment, but they may have like botched the whole process, and how they did it was very messy, right? And we oftentimes don't focus on these kind of like processes in between. We only focus on the final outcomes. Some things that we raise questions surrounding is kind of like, what is it rooted in, or what is it based on? Is it behaviors, just behaviors, and we're not taking into consideration any attributes or any personality characteristics? So we saw in the model, the 4 steps or the 4 behaviors, there was a lot of focus on doing, a lot of focus on behaviors. But there wasn't as much focus on kind of like who the leader is, what they stand for. And that is a big criticism of transformational leadership, is like you could be kind of creating a new vision and motivating everybody to do it, but is it ethical, right? So like we're not taking into consideration that character, the leader's character. And that's why we have different types of leadership come about now that emphasize those things, like ethical leadership. There's like a bunch of like we keep coming up with more and more leadership styles, by the way. So that is a concern there surrounding transformational leadership. And lastly, one key question that we have about it is it universal? Is transformational leadership for the Canadian population, or what constitutes transformational leadership for Canada? Is it the same as what transformational leadership is somewhere in Africa? So we do question kind of whether it takes into account the differences in culture and whether it should be versatile or receptive to the differences in culture. Okay, so that's what we question in it being a universal theory. Is it truly universal? Does it truly apply the same way across all cultures? Do all cultures kind of react to it in a similar way if we are only adopting that model of 4 processes or 4 behaviors? So that is a key thing to note. Now, we've been referencing this quite a bit, but oftentimes one key style of leadership that we compare to transformational leadership a lot, and we're always like back and forth kind of comparing the two, is managerial leadership, or what you might find in other books called transactional leadership. And that is, your very basic type of leadership that is more geared towards, laying a process for employees, making sure that you're laying out the rewards and the consequences. So it's very managerial in nature, hence the name, managerial leadership. Okay, so you're just making sure that your employees are doing their work on time. You're making sure that the outcomes are satisfactory, but you're not really concerned with kind of like generating something beyond expectations or doing something grand or something of a great magnitude. It's none of your concern there. All you're concerned with is just the work gets done. Status quo is achieved. We get to leave work by 5 p.m. We come back tomorrow. We do the same thing. And you're just making sure that that is what's going on, right? So that's kind of the key thing going on there. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that although this generally gets a bit of a negative connotation in that, it's status quo, or like, we're just doing the same thing again and again, day in, day out. And transformational leadership gets like the positive connotation and it gets all the limelight, essentially. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that, creating compelling visions and communicating new visions is all great, but unless you actually act on it and actually lay out the process on how to achieve that new vision, it's all fluff, right? So as an effective leader, for you to be an effective leader, truly an effective leader, you do need to have elements of transformational leadership, but also elements of transactional or managerial leadership. Because if you're just talking at this high level and not showing the employees who are actually going to be driving production day to day, if you're not showing them how that work is done and you're not setting performance standards and not setting consequences and rewards, you're not going to get anywhere. That vision that you articulated is not going to come to be. Okay? So usually the most effective way of leading or the most effective style of leadership will take both elements. We'll take a bit of transformational and we'll take a bit of transactional. Sometimes it'll be more of the transformational if the environment requires that we are changing things up. But you have to keep in mind, you cannot just kind of like always be articulating fluffy visions and things that are very meta and abstract in nature. You got to bring it down to the employees level. Okay, you got to show them how it's done on a day-to-day basis. So yes, we want to become innovative as an organization, but what does innovation on a day-to-day basis mean to my employees? And that's what managerial leadership takes care of. Okay, it's figuring out what it means in terms of the day-to-day work that is done. Okay, so it depends on the situation, and oftentimes we need both. We need an element of transformational and an element of transactional or managerial. Questions about managerial leadership? Okay, maybe we'll take a bit of a break after this, but let's just wrap up managerial leadership. Some key elements of managerial leadership, even though it's kind of like very process-oriented, and I think we tend to emphasize the task side of it, so we call it task-oriented or task style of leadership and under managerial, and that's where, again, you're clarifying roles, you're clarifying responsibilities, you're clarifying consequences, you're clarifying rewards. So it's very kind of like administrative in nature. But there are some kind of people-oriented behaviors or relational-oriented styles that fall under it. Okay? So, even though you're concerned with the process, the procedures, and the work, but you still want to make sure that your employees are feeling happy at work to a bare minimum, right? So you are still concerned on a relational level, but it's just not at the level of transformational leadership, perhaps, okay? You're just doing the bare minimum so that your employees are happy enough to come to work every day and do work in a pleasant environment, okay? So there are some relational elements to it, but it's just not the be-all, end-all of managerial leadership, okay? So again, we see a combination of task and people-oriented styles under managerial leadership, okay? Questions about that? Okay. Why don't you take a 5-minute break and we'll just clear your mind, and then we'll come back and wrap up with our most recent forms of leadership.